Hello and welcome to our program Where God Weeps, a program where we talk about the situation of the suffering church around the world. South Sudan came into being in July of 2011, the world's newest African nation, proclaiming peace after 22 years of civil war with the North. Sadly, this young country has since fallen victim to its own civil war. What started as a power struggle between the president and his deputy soon erupted into inter-ethnic fighting between the Dinka and Nuer tribes. Thousands of people have died, and as many as 1.5 million have been forced to flee their homes. To tell us more, it is my great privilege to welcome Bishop Edward Kussala of the Tombura-Yambio diocese in South Sudan. Welcome, Your Excellency, and thank you for being with us here today on our program.
Thank you, Mark, for giving me this opportunity.
Your Excellency, immediately to the question of the troubles facing South Sudan, what started as a power struggle between President Kiir Salva and Riedemann, his former vice president, has since erupted into inter-ethnic violence between the Dinka and predominantly the Dinka and Nuer tribes. Can you tell us, how did this come about?
We were not obviously taken by surprise because before that we were already seeing some signs of an uncomfortable relationship between the president and his deputy. And then until he reshuffled the government and laid him off, already people were not comfortable with this development, and we knew something wrong would happen. And just few days before, there was a convention within, this took place within the SPLM party. Yes. All of them are SPLM members or a party. And so it took place within the party. And so we, from our side, knew that the relationship within the party was not proper. The SPLM itself, since it became a government, did not yet finish restructuring itself, its policy, its mission, and all that was left.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, because I suppose also we have to understand these were all military men which were suddenly obliged to be politicians. And I suppose there's also an education process that wasn't resolved or wasn't finished.
Correct. That the job was not finished, and that actually brought back this problem, because the language spoken within the SPLM, why this issue came about was the reformation. Some members within the party wanted reforms in certain policies, in certain way of doing things, and you know that the group, of course, have been fighting. They are all colleagues of the Revolutionary War, and so they were warned. I think I have to say this: they were warned by our Archbishop Paulino Lukudu of the Catholic Church, and Archbishop Deng of the Episcopal Church, that they should stop the way they were going, and they shouldn't go on into the convention. But eventually they stubbornly went into the convention, and it became a war.
And the division occurred.
And the division occurred. Now, as you were asking me whether it is on a tribal, when it took a tribal dimension, for sure, it is good to understand this. When the movement started, it started among predominantly the Dinka tribe and the Nuer.
Now, just another side question, but perhaps a problematic one, is that, of course, these ethnic tribes, for them, borders don't have a lot of representation in many cases, and you find perhaps an ethnic group bordering. Is the risk that other countries might be drawn into the conflict, for example, if Nuer or, for example, Kenya or other bordering countries might be drawn into the conflict because of the ethnic group?
I would say that the longer the war takes, there's the danger that people may begin to take side. And we already have a fear that among the East African countries, there are all of them seem to have a different approaches to the conflict. Sudan has its own approach to the conflict. Ethiopia has its own approach. Kenya has its own approach. Uganda the same, and eventually Congo. So these countries could become also, because if they don't agree unanimously that we all have to make sure South Sudan is stable in the right way, and then you be sure the longer the war takes, the greater the risk it will be there. And so the ethnic group, the Nuer are found in Ethiopia. They have a big region called Gambela, in the western part of Ethiopia, and there are so many Nuer in there. And now, actually, most of the refugees from among the Nuer have moved into this camp. So you might not know how would be the feeling of the Ethiopian towards the Nuer in Sudan, who might be thought to be killed, and they might
start taking
they
up
might
arms.
Take a side. Who knows?
Yes. Bishop Parit Taban was very critical, has been very critical of the whole situation, as many of the Catholic bishops, very upset. And he, and I quote here, stated, "During the civil wars, you could see the blood of our people dripping from the hands of others. But from whose hands is the blood dripping now? Who is killing Christians? Now, it is we, the Christians, and we are not ashamed. If we were ashamed, we would stop." He's making reference, of course, to the question that previously the civil war between North and South, predominantly Islam, Muslim versus Christians and traditional religions. But now in South Sudan, in principle, traditional religions and Christians, which means it's Christian against Christian. Doesn't this break your heart?
I feel terribly ashamed, actually, to talk about the conflict in our country. And many times that I am out, like now I'm out of South Sudan visiting, I fear to share with people my identity. Say, I come from South Sudan. So, oh no, you people, what's wrong with you? That feeling is there. We really feel guilty about what has happened, and we are ashamed about it. And it is too painful. In all the wars we had with the North, the way this particular war has taken place, we have no recent memory. And this has been so painful. And knowing that we are just trying to gather our broken pieces to put ourselves in order, and this has to happen and among ourselves. And so we are saddened by it, and we remorse ourselves, we blame ourselves, but then we need to wake up and say, this should not continue, and just to stop. And that's why, like Bishop Parit and all of us, all the bishops, all the people in the church and the other churches, we are working hard to talk to the hearts of these people, to stop and not to go anymore into war. And that's why I myself am personally involved in the peace talk and getting in touch with these people one by one, trying to see that, to convince and to help them, please stop fighting, and we better talk. And the talking will be better than the war.
But it's an enormous challenge at the same time for the Christian leaders, because it means actually that still ethnicity is more important than the Christian education, the Christian values for peace. And so this means you still have a long road ahead of you to help these tribes understand that the Christian values actually precede the tribal values.
I think you might be rightly so to say this, because we believe, I don't know if you have the statistic, South Sudan is the most predominantly Christian country in the sub-Sahara. Nearly 97%, all of us go to church. And you go on Sundays and see how, and other feast days, our churches are packed. From our top leaders to anybody is inside the church. And here, this is where the paradox of our faith is. how, when I say I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic, how does it really influence my being? And I think at a deeper level, at the inner level, we need still more conversion, so that we are able to, I wonder if somebody will be ready in that situation to die for Christ, if it is just easy for him to kill his brother or his sister. So it is a big challenge for us, and we have to revisit our pastoral approach, to reorganize probably our catechesis, and see how we can now talk about the sanctity of life, that is, of course, a God-given life, the human dignity. And so the whole issue around the social teaching of the church, I think we need to go back into it. But don't forget that the country, South Sudan, is, in terms of education, almost 90% are illiterate, do not know how to read and write. So such a number, we have not gone through the Enlightenment period and all that. So it's just like people waking up to a reality of life. So this primitive approach to solving a problem can still hang over us. But I have to say that as a church, we are very much conscious of this, and we would like to go very strongly into it. And we are already doing it. A lot of activities are taking place. Like in my diocese, since that day, there's continual prayer, continual conduct in schools, to reaching out to government, in villages, talking about the importance of keeping peace and respecting human dignity. And we have even decided to go above this whole issue of tribal differences, receiving people from these different ethnic groups to stay together and working together with them. On our radios, we have messages about unity. So I think we have got to learn. And if Rwanda can still now live, we also see that there can be hope for us.
There's hope for you as well, yes. Yeah. I want to come back to this other question, because I'm sorry to keep putting a finger in the wound. But for example, Monsignor Rocco Taban, the Apostolic Administrator of Makal, he said, many of our churches, homes, and so on have been razed to the ground, and everything has been looted. Is this random looting, or are churches at the same time being targeted and destroyed? Is this the devil wagging his tail and taking advantage of people's ignorance and their poverty and frustration to attack and destroy?
There is a very slight difference between anger and danger. You take the D, it remains anger. You put the D to danger. You know, in the midst of that confusion that took place, it's hard to know the attitude and the behavior of the rebels, and I mean the whole body that was fighting. It is difficult to describe it, because these are Christians, but how they could not see anything, it's because the way of behavior, I cannot clearly say it was like against the church in such a way, persecuting the church, but the behavior could manifest it. They went, one of the examples that it was so terrible, you know, our retired Bishop Vincent Majok, was in Malakal. The first attack, the rebels came and took over the town. He remained. He did not want to go away. And then they came to him and they said, we need your car. And they said, okay, but this is what I'm using for taking care of you. They said, no, we will bring you back the car. They took it and never brought it back. Then they came another day. He had one already, the religious sister. They all gathered together. And they said, this sister is helping people. She's and they wanted to shoot her. And the bishop came in front of the man with the gun and said, you shoot me first, don't shoot the sister. You shoot me. So the young man saw it and they went away. Now, you really hardly can know whether these guys had anything to do like really fighting the church. Of course, fighting the people is fighting the church. And then beyond this, they have to destroy the properties, the church building, and all that, the resources that the church had. And the church, in effect, was the home for keeping the people. People ran into the cathedral.
To seek refuge.
To seek refuge.
Yes.
And they came in there and they're shooting at the people. So I really, that anger and what it produced is difficult to tell. But honestly, to tell you the truth, the diocese of Malakal, I don't know how many years it would take to come back, because it is true, beyond doubt, everything has actually been lost, archive and properties, and psychologically, actually, the whole body of the church is devastated. We need to continue to pray for this diocese, and it is the biggest diocese in the area. It has 3 states, Jongale, which is Bor, Malakal, and the Bentiu, and all these are one of the most populated area within the place. So in terms of material, they are terribly destroyed.
Perhaps this is an unfair question. Is there an interest in watching from, for example, the north, the collapse, the implosion, if you will, of South Sudan? Or is it not a fair question? Is it not right?
I have to say that before the independence, and I think you heard it, that the North was like making prophecy, say, look, these people will never be a country, they will be a failing state. It was the
propaganda.
The propaganda of the day, and everybody was talking about the failing state of the country. And now with this war, they say, yes, you see, we told you, these guys cannot rule themselves. We knew they will not. Because actually, Khartoum knew at which stage they were leaving South Sudan. They were aware of how we are structured. They know that these people are still in their tribal groups. They also knew that these guys have just come from fighting forces, and to restructure a country, to put it in order, they knew this difficulty would be there. And there are tough remaining issues still between us and Sudan. Up to now, as I speak, the border line between us is not yet drawn.
It's not yet drawn.
Yes, and the whole issue of ABA and the economy, we are still passing the oil through their country.
Because
so
I mean, the risk you can imagine that if the violence continues, if it isn't resolved, if it simply goes from peace agreement to peace agreement to peace agreement, that at some point the North says, look, it is a failed state and we have a justification to go in with our military and reclaim at least the oil fields, because that's, for, of course, the North, that's the interest. So, if you prophesy in a pessimistic way, you could see something quite dark on the horizon.
Yeah, I think they could think so, and they definitely would wish, if they can, to sponsor the conflict to continue, and they really make sure to say, you see, we are a failing state. Although the separation of the country, as you said, agreement to agreement, was not solving the problem. It was simply like dividing the country into 2 for problems. Because Sudan itself is still as a war in Darfur. The Nuba people are being killed every day, and there is bombardment. There's genocide being taking place in the Nuba Mountains and in the Blue Nile. So Sudan is tremendously also all the obstacles has not yet solved. It can't just jump and say South Sudan is a failing state. They also are running the risk. They have their own problems. They have their own problems. But then I think the issue here is we need to speed. The world needs to speed, or whoever has an interest has to speed stopping South Sudan from continuing the war. Continuing the war definitely can come to this kind of state, because it will fragment the country. I just quite sure know that if we still remain in the situation in which we are, it is going to fragment the country. That means we might become like Somalia, yes, with small little groups holding to pieces of South Sudan, and that can be a bigger problem. So,
to positive, the Church is one of the few remaining institutions with the present difficulties in the government, the Church being one of the few institutions that is still standing, to which the people look as a voice of authority, as a voice of leadership. How are you and the Church involved in the peace process, trying to help bring about reconciliation between these people?
It has been, it's actually our vocation before the during the war, and then the whole process to getting the Republic of South Sudan. It was the hard work of the church. The church was everything, and it's everything in terms of material support for the people and the spiritual support for the people. And now it is this juncture where the conflict has come again. The church has continued, and we still continue passing on messages that have to change people's behavior, educating people on the issues of peace building and the reconciliation, and also providing humanitarian support. But our concern at the moment, as a church, one of the willingness of Bishops' Conference is also assigning one of us, one of the bishops, to the peace talk, was myself. And I have to tell you that my presence there with the team I went was very useful. Well, like the bridge between the two, when they get stuck, or the different stakeholders, the church comes in and then tries to talk to them, to convince them, to help them to come to the table, and also they had a confidence, there was trust that they would come and tell us, confess their problems to us, and we go the other side and talk to the other side. And our team was not only Catholic, it was ecumenical. So we had Protestant, Evangelical, Muslim. We formed a kind of a faith-based organization to the peace talk. So the church is so much organized to move. And we are now even seeing that instead of following the IGAD-led peace initiative, we are also setting a church-based approach to the conflict, because we know there's a huge number of people who are silent, who are not involved in the peace talk, but they have a say. So we want to involve everybody at the grassroots, so that they know their rights and they know their importance in terms of contributing peace. And so very much like anything, there's not much work we can do except work for peace. So there's no any unemployed personnel in our churches, because the work for peace is so much that you cannot stay idle. You have to work to make sure that there's
This
peace.
is, I think, the gift of the church. That is, you are disinterested. That is, you have not a political interest, except for the stability of the country, and that you have the foot in both the Nuer, the Dinka, all of the different ethnic groups, the churches there, and finally, as you say, the ecumenical aspect to bring in the other Christian communities. Do you see signs of hope, and where are these signs of hope?
Yes, I am very optimistic that I can see light at the end of the tunnel. I can still see that this is not the end of the road, and it is surely going to end. And when is it going to end? God has the program. But the willingness from everybody is that it should end now and should stop. And people are tired. Actually, the language, the feeling of everybody is that this war is useless. It has no objective. It has no point. It's wasting of resources for nothing. And so my hope is in God, that He's going to help us. And my hope is in that goodwill of the people of South Sudan, those who really mean peace and who are working day and night to make sure that peace is there. My hope is in the churches and the Muslim group who are interested in peace. And my hope is in the international community, who will not need to let us just sit and killing ourselves, but they have to help us to make sure that the conflict in South Sudan ends. So with this, I'm quite sure that this is not going to remain forever. It is going to end, and South Sudan will be stable.
What can we do? This brings me to the question, what can we do as the Universal Church for you in South Sudan?
As a people of God, and definitely I would ask, we need your prayers. Amidst all this, the worst thing you can ever have is when you talk of poverty, is to be alone, to be isolated, to be left by yourself. But when you know that there's somebody, and there are people there praying for you, there are people there who are concerned, it's a consolation. For South Sudan to have a hope is to be aware of the prayers of the people around us praying for peace. And definitely, of course, it brings with it the humanitarian support And I must tell you that we are going to face serious humanitarian crisis. Most of the area destroyed. It is a swamp place. Water, a flood is filling the place. No way to carry food to the needy people. No way to make cultivation, and the life of the refugees is not in order.
So famine basically.
Famine is going to be a problem, and for sure we need support. And definitely we need more continual advocacy, lobbying for peace at any level. Anybody who can do anything really to make sure that the conflict in South Sudan stops would be great. So I really appeal and I think each and everyone, especially Aid to the Church in Need, that has been very instrumental in our pastoral ministry. Without the support we get through the Church in Need, I think our churches would have been almost closed. So I thank all our benefactors and all the people of goodwill who look upon us and support our case.
Your Excellency, we will continue to pray for you and for peace in your country.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much. God bless you.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having been with us today on our program, Where God Weeps. And if you'd like to know what you can do in prayer or in concrete action, I would encourage you to look at the contact information at the end of this program. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.